Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we have a really great knife to take a look at. This is the Kirby Lambert designed, Reate built Crossroads. This is one of my favorite knives of 2018, no question. Just a beautiful sort of conglomeration, if you will, of a lot of things that I really like about knives. You know, so there's sort of a nod to the traditional here. It's got all the innovation and it's got all of the interesting little details that you could ever want. It's from a great designer. It has a useful balanced blade shape. Just a lot of things really come together in this knife to make it stand out to me, not only out of Reate's lineup, but really out of all the knives that were available last year, in terms of sort of that high-end, 300 plus space. So fantastic knife. I'm really excited to be able to share it with you. And I know a number of you have been waiting for this video, asking for the full review. So this is going to be it. So in terms of size here, this knife is a pretty full size folder. You can see, just in my hand that it's not a small knife, but 8 and, let's see, what is it? 8 7/16 overall. 3 5/8 on the overall blade length there, 4 3/4 closed. So that is, this size here from the butt to the top of the handle. And it weighs in at 5.9 ounces, which is a little hefty for its size. But honestly, a 5-ounce knife doesn't even bother me in the slightest. The blade here is really cool. And there are a lot of really cool things we're going to see about this knife. We've got this sort of two-tone finish on this really nicely done blade. Sort of a modified clip point, I guess, would be the best way to express this. A really nicely done hollow grind. And I love the satin, grinder satin there. Just beautiful blade. And in addition to being extremely attractive from just an aesthetic standpoint, it's also really nicely done in terms of usefulness. It's nice and thin behind the edge, which is provided by that hollow grind. We still got fairly substantial blade stock here. One thing I always gripe about, and I'm really glad they did it, is a lot of times a knife that has a top swedge like this, they'll bring the swedge back too far so I don't have a nice spot to rest my thumb, but this one did not make that mistake. So really nice. It does thicken up here as you watch the grind come. You can see that it does thicken up at the tip a little bit. And although visually that's not my favorite, I will say it makes sense from a utility standpoint to make that that tip a little more robust. Now, this is still not a knife that I'm going to go prying with or anything like that. I don't really pry with any of my knives, whether they cost $30 or $300. But, I suppose the motivation to not pry with this one is a little stronger. All right, M390 is the steel here, which of course is fantastic steel. And again, this is a really nicely balanced blade. It's not a kitchen knife, but to me, an EDC knife is not supposed to be a kitchen knife, right? I rarely find myself cutting food with my EDC knife. I have kitchen knives for that. So for me, I love a blade like this where it's a little bit thicker, it's a little more utilitarian instead of just being this super flat grind, kitchen style grind that is fine and it's highly useful, but I'd rather see something a little more interesting and a little more robust on a knife that's meant to be carried in the pocket. All right. So yeah, this blade I think is a total win. You can see the maker's mark there, the Lambert maker's mark, and the Reate logo on the other side. And then we can kind of move our way down to the pivot here. So we have ceramic bearings, really dialed in. This is just impeccable. Like it really feels fantastic. It's smooth. The detent is just, you could never ask for a better detent than this. Right, everything is just extremely well executed here, and so in terms of in terms of comfort, in terms of flickability and that play factor, that fondle factor, I guess, absolutely has that in spades. They've even they've paid a good attention to detail. Now they've got nice jimping on here, so I would say this is a knife designed to be push buttoned, and the jimping on the back of the flipper tab is sort of communicating that to you, which I do like to see. But it will light switch as well, so you can kind of catch the top there and light switch it out quite nicely. I generally find myself push buttoning this knife more so than light switching. Now, while we're talking about the pivot, I think we'll do a bit of an aside. Look at that pivot screw. So this is done by tie connectors. So you're getting kind of a tie connectors. You can, this is a fairly standard shape for them, but it's pretty cool that Reate went the extra mile here, or maybe Kirby Lambert, I don't know who was responsible for that decision, and said, let's add, sort of a little bit of flair to that pivot. And I do think they've done a really nice job with that bronze and blue. Absolutely, it just adds a bit of detail and a bit of visual interest to the knife that I think really, really helps. Because overall, and here's one of the things I have to say about this. I know I'm jumping ahead in the discussion, but this is a knife that really I find does a great job of balancing attention to detail and getting some small, visually interesting, cool things going on while not being over the top. Right? Some knives that have a lot of milling and a lot of colors and stuff, they're just too much, where this is really, really balanced. And they've really, struck that fine line between great details and being a very interesting knife while not being so over the top that it's like overwhelming, right? That it detracts from the overall style. So I've got to say, I really, really like the balance point that they've hit with this knife. All right, so other than that, now we've talked about the pivot screw there, which is really, really nice. The action is just phenomenal. It really is. And honestly, at this point, that's pretty well expected from Reate. I dare say in 2018, you're not going to buy a Reate that doesn't have pretty phenomenal action, okay? And so, going forward, whatever they come out with for 2019, I'm sure it will be spectacular as well. They really have dialed in that aspect of knife making. They can do a pivot that is smooth as silk and has just a fantastic action. I have to give them a lot of credit for that. Handle construction. Okay, so let's take a look at the way they've done this. There's a couple of cool things. This, of course, is not a frame lock. It's a bolster lock. And we've got these carbon fiber overlays here. The transition between the titanium and carbon fiber is nearly perfect. Like, you can barely feel it, which is really, really nice, and definitely a testament to their manufacturing quality. All of this, just everything is perfectly flush. And as you look through the knife, you can see that floating backspacer. Again, and here's another small thing that they got right. Notice the bronze on the standoffs there, which ties into the bronze pivot collar. So it's really nice to kind of connect a knife that way. From a design standpoint, I think that's really, really important. If this was the only bronze, it's kind of like, well, it doesn't seem to fit with the overall theme of the knife. But the way that they've done this really pulls it together. We've got our lanyard pin back here, and then that really attractive floating backspacer, which is really nicely done. Flip the knife over to this side. We've got a single position clip that once again, ties in really, really well. And one of the things I have to say, I really, really like, we call this the show side, okay? This is the side of the knife you're supposed to show off in pictures and stuff. I love when a knife has a frame side that is just as beautiful as the show side. And this one absolutely pulls that off. The clip is sort of minimalist and great. And by the way, it works quite well. I'm trying to remember the last time I had it in 511s. It's probably, let's take a look here. So you can see it's not the biggest space in here. So if you put it in 511s with that extra thick pocket protection, I guess, for knife enthusiasts, you might have a bit of a problem. But under normal circumstances, this knife goes in and out of pocket just fine. I find this clip works pretty well. There's a bit of springiness to it. It's pretty well balanced. And I have to say, well, I used to complain quite frequently about milled titanium clips. These days they tend to be more well done, right? You rarely, at least I can't remember recently seeing a milled clip that really blew it. And certainly this one is well done. So in terms of handle construction, I really like the way that they've put this knife together. It is, the only thing I guess we didn't talk about was stop pin is back here. So it's not an internal stop pin. It's just built into the frame. Ergonomics on this is quite good as well. So in a hammer grip, it's pretty good. One thing you'll notice is a hammer grip is, it has a lot to do with how hand filling a handle is. So a super, super slim handle is not going to feel as nice in a hammer grip. The saber grip is pretty forgiving. Lots of knives feel good in a saber grip that don't feel good in other grips. This one feels good just about whatever you do with it, because it's just, there's no sharp edges. Everything is smooth. The finger trails here are quite generous and they fit my fingers pretty well. If you had hands bigger than mine, I think you'd still be okay. The only issue is, right, I can imagine someone maybe with really small hands where, your fingers are so small that two want to fit up here. That would have to be really small, but I could see some people with smaller hands maybe not sort of connecting with this knife very well when they get it in hand. If you've got smaller hands and you have one of these and you want to tell me I'm wrong, hey, let me know down in the comments. Even with larger hands than mine, I think you'd be quite good with this. Okay, so ergonomics is, it's good. Now it is all smooth. There's not a lot of traction here. They've achieved, keeping the knife in hand by the shape of the handle, which does work really well. Would I want to use this? I don't know, if I was fighting zombies or something like that. No, probably not. But I have other knives that are definitely more suited to that role. Yeah, I wouldn't take this out to the bush with me either, okay? But that's not what the knife is meant to be used for. It's sort of a gentleman's / EDC style of knife. It's probably on the what would you say, the EDC plus end of the spectrum. It's a little more robust than your average EDC knife, but it's definitely not meant to be a tactical use knife. It's not meant to be a hard use knife either. All right, so there we go. That kind of runs through the overall knife, touches on all of the details, all of the things that I have to say I'm pretty impressed by. Let's go ahead though and get some comparisons, because this is one of the things, when you're going to spend, I think these go for about $350. When you're going to spend that kind of money on a knife, one, you have a lot of options. Number two, there are some people who are going to balk at that price point right away and just not be interested. Now, the first thing that I want to bring in that kind of addresses that is this knife. Now, this is a Reate build for bag knives, and it's the similarity between these two is that this is a Reate build of a custom and this is a Reate build of a custom. The difference is this one charges a lot more because bag tends to demand some higher prices for his stuff, and so the bodega here is like a good $100 more than this. I think about that, so maybe $75 more. If these are $425, which I'm kind of guessing at right now. Okay, now let me also add this. I love this knife and I think it's really well done and I really like the details, but this knife is pushing that borderline of being over the top, okay? This knife is definitely classier and more minimalist, and I've got to say I really, really appreciate that. But I wanted to bring this in more to speak about value and of course to point out that Reate can build some really nice stuff. Their quality is very, very consistent. Now let me bring in a couple of other knives, and I want to bring in a couple of WE knives here. So here is the WE Slipstream, which I think is pretty well my favorite WE design. And then I have another WE built knife here. This is the Mastrop Ferrum Forge Crux built by WE. Okay, and I know there might be some guys who get mad at me for saying this, but Reate is just a step above. All right, now, can we ask the question legitimately whether or not we're willing to pay like an extra $100? Yes. Okay, now by the way, not all, this knife I think sells for like $295 and this is $325. All right, well, for that $35, you are getting a lot more, right? The action on this is perfection. The action on this is good, but if you flip them both, you really can feel the difference and you go, yeah, this is much more refined. All right. Now, I do want to show you these for another reason, and that is if you're watching this going, Kevin, that knife, I love it, but it's just more than I want to deal with in terms of price. Well, look, this I think is a great option. This is the Mastrop Ferrum Forge Crux. In terms of value, this has got to be one of the best values out there. It's built by WE. It's the quality is absolutely phenomenal, and you can really experience, the action and the fit and finish and the overall quality of a really high-end knife. It really does come very close to what you're getting in these two knives, but it's like 124 bucks. So I wanted to bring that in because some of you watching, you may go, Kevin, I appreciate seeing this knife, but it's not for me. Well, this might be something that gets you close to this experience for considerably less money. All right, so that I think is an important discussion to have. I do want to bring in the other Reate I have here. This, of course, is the Reate Torrent. Both of these knives are fantastic, and they're fantastic for the same reasons. Now, this one has a couple things going on that are actually a little bit better. It's a little more robust, and I would call this probably a little heavier use than this. But both of them really capture, probably this says something about my preferences as a knife enthusiast, but both of these really do a lot for me. These, I find they're almost perfect balances between, detail and quality and simplicity. Like, they're not quite what I would describe as minimalist. That would be more something like this, but they have just enough detail to make them really cool and really interesting while not being over the top and not going too far and not being the kind of knife that you don't want to use and carry. I use and carry these all the time, and I really appreciate the fact that both of them make me feel pretty comfortable doing that. All right, move this guy out of the way. Let's see, what else have we got here? Well, can you really talk about titanium frame locks without talking about a Chris Reeve? So here we have the Nkosi, which is a fantastic knife. I absolutely love what they've done with the Nkosi. I would say if you are kind of with me in terms of aesthetics, that's that simple class that's still visually interesting, I think Chris Reeve has done a good job here of offering something that does go above and beyond, right? I would say if you took both of these knives out in the field and just used and abused them nonstop, this knife is absolutely going to outlast this one. It's built to do that, by the way, where this one isn't. But I thought I'd bring that in case you go, okay, Kevin, I appreciate what you're saying about this, but is there something that's a little more robust? And yeah, that would be certainly a more robust example. And then finally, I want to bring in a Kaiser at the end. Again, to give you guys the option to sort of say, yeah, this is phenomenal, but can you get something close without spending the kind of money that this costs? And yeah, you can. There are a number of of Kaiser knives. Wow. Of Kaiser knives that are really well done. The action on this one is pretty well dialed in, and that's one of the reasons I brought this one along, because it does exemplify what I like to see in a knife action. It's pretty snappy, it's pretty smooth. Of course, it's still got that stupid looking pivot, but otherwise, I do really appreciate this knife. So yeah, what do I think of this knife overall? Well, if you've been watching for the last 17 minutes, I love it, right? This is a beautiful knife, so well put together. Is it going to stay in the collection forever? Probably. I really enjoy it an awful lot. I've already had some people approach me about buying it. I'm definitely not in a rush to sell it. I suppose, if you kept making higher and higher bids, I might be persuaded. But I have to say, this knife really suits me in terms of what they've done here, in terms of the balance that it strikes between being really beautiful, which I absolutely think it is, while still being useful, and a knife that you're not uncomfortable, at least I'm not uncomfortable using and carrying. So yeah, great all-around knife. I think not for everybody, and that's why I tried to bring in as many examples as I did. By the way, let me bring in my Crooked River. This Crooked River is not really similar, but I do love the fact that they kind of turned out to be sort of related in terms of the bolster with the carbon fiber and just the overall look of these two. They kind of are a matching pair almost. Anyway, back to what I was saying about the Reate. Yeah, I get that it's probably not for everybody, and some of you watching are really watching it more out of interest than out of a desire to actually own one. But right? For those of you who look at this and think, what a beautiful knife, I think it's worth your while to, this is something I think that's pretty special and worth the money to put out, and worth, even if you have to save up for it, I think it's something that's pretty cool. And I'm really glad that Reate and Kirby Lambert were able to work together and bring this to fruition. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for bearing with me for 19 minutes. And if you're still watching, hit the notification button, since subscriptions don't mean as much as they used to on YouTube. Talk to you later.